Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. This is part one of my interview with Mr. Warren Redlich about the DUI issue. Mr. Redlich is an attorney and the author of Fair DUI, Stay Safe and Sane in a World Gone Mad, with MAD spelled M-A-D-D. He specializes in personal injury and criminal defense law and has handled numerous cases in traffic court. He's also run for the U.S. House of Representatives and for governor of New York. You can follow his work at fairdui.org and westbocanews.com. You can find him on Facebook under Fair DUI and on Twitter at FairDUI. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/DUI. Warren, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining me. So I've been mentioning this term DUI, and most people probably know what it means, but can you give a brief definition of DUI?
Sure. First of all, there are multiple ways it's referred to. It depends what state you're in. I am actually from New York, and in New York it's referred to as DWI. DWI is driving while intoxicated. In most of the country, I would say the most common term is DUI, which is typically driving under the influence. Ohio, I think it's OVI, and Massachusetts, it's OUI, operating under the influence, operating vehicle while intoxicated. But it's in short, it's a shorthand term for drunk driving.
Okay, so there's no difference between DUI and DWI. It's just a regional difference in term, but there's no difference in actual meaning.
Every state, there's always differences in states as to what something means and whether something matters. Every state has its own rules. The use of the term probably doesn't matter a whole lot. What matters, but every state has little quirks about what it means to be DUI or DWI and so on. But yeah, the terms are used interchangeably by most people.
Okay. All right, so how did laws regarding DUI or DWI, or just drunk driving in general, how did those laws originate, and how was this problem addressed prior to the laws that we think of in the modern day related to those issues?
Well, I think traditionally the general idea was reckless driving was illegal, and it wasn't necessarily very carefully enforced. A lot of traffic laws were not, I think, enforced quite as seriously until maybe the last 50 years. And then there was a very serious problem of people dying on the roads. Drunk driving was much more common, much more accepted. And a group of people, and I think MAD was one of the big drivers of it, but people decided, we've got to do something about drunk driving. And so they started adopting laws specifying blood alcohol content, making it illegal. And it took a long time to get police departments to enforce them. A lot of cops didn't like the laws. A lot of cops still don't like the laws. And but there's gradually pressure over time to make stricter laws and enforce them more strictly. And that's a process, a long conversation. And I'm probably not the best historian of the DUI law, history, but that's my general understanding of it was. And it's absolutely true. There were far too many people driving really hammered and causing a lot of death on the roads. And that has been reduced dramatically. I don't necessarily agree that it's been reduced because of DUI enforcement, but our roads are a lot safer for a lot of reasons. And I think DUI is actually, the DUI laws are little, if any, reason for the improvements on the roads. And that's a conversation in of itself if you want to have it. It matters.
Yeah, sure. I think I have to ask you right now, why are roads safer now? What's changed?
Sure. The biggest reasons the roads are safer is, number one, seatbelt usage. And I don't mean seatbelt laws. There's two big reasons. One is just overall seatbelt usage is up dramatically from, say, 50 years ago. And seatbelts make people safer. And whether I don't believe that the laws are the reasons that people wear seatbelts, I think we just got smarter. We started to recognize it. I don't think seatbelt laws made a big difference. And then demographics. The proportion of drivers who are of a responsible driving age. I remember driving as a 16-year-old male, and I don't think I became a much better driver until somewhere in my 20s, and my wife might argue I'm still not. But generally speaking, drivers, when they get over 20, 25 years old, the experience makes them much better drivers. And we have fewer kids. Demographically, we're having fewer kids, so the proportion of the population that is young drivers is just a much smaller chunk of the people on the road. And so we just have a lot better drivers on the road than we had before. And those two, the better drivers, the more responsible older drivers reduce the accident rate dramatically. And then the seatbelt laws, the use of seatbelts reduced the severity of the accidents in terms of injuries. And also cars are made safer. A lot of other things are going on. I think when you talk about DUI, and the people who support the DUI laws will say, well, they reduced traffic fatalities or they made the road safer. And I just think that's bunk. And there's really not a lot of evidence to support their claim. And a great example of the nonsense is the obsession. There's a current obsession with texting while driving and talking on the cell phone while driving. And I think I saw one study that said texting while driving was 7 times more dangerous than drunk driving. Well, there's all this talk in the elections of politics about, this group's denying science or whatever. And if you believe in science and you follow the scientific method, a great hypothesis with texting, which is easier to use for me than DUI, is, okay, 25 years ago, no one was texting while driving. And today, everyone is texting while driving. So if you believe that texting while driving is an extremely dangerous thing, you would expect to see a very large increase in the accident rate because there's so many more people texting while driving than there was 25 years ago. Does that make sense as a hypothesis?
Yeah. And yet we're not really seeing that.
No, we're seeing the opposite. The accident rate is down dramatically over the last 25 years. So if the hypothesis if you're taking science and you're saying, okay, we'll formulate a hypothesis and then we'll test it, the hypothesis would be you have this dramatic increase in texting while driving, you should see a dramatic increase in accident rates. And we're talking about people saying that it's 7 times more dangerous than drunk driving. We're not saying it's a little more dangerous than ordinary driving, right? So you should see an outsized increase in accident rates. And you don't see it. And it's not like the texting laws have stopped anybody because we all see people texting. First of all, some of us text while we're driving ourselves, but we've all had that moment driving down the road and the car in front of us doesn't go and the light turns green and you change lanes and pass them and you can see they're looking at their phone. We all have those moments where we see people texting, while they're driving. We know it's a lot more common than it was 25 years ago when no one was doing it. So the argument that texting laws made us safer is nonsense. Lots of people are texting and we're still safer. So I would argue the same with DUI laws. I'm not saying that there's no value in any DUI laws, but if you start with the premise that, somebody's hammered, then okay, they should be charged. We've gotten to the point now where you've had one drink or you've had no drinks and the police can arrest you and it can stick because the DUI laws have gone so far over the top. That's something people just don't get. They think that the police only arrest drunks, and it's just absolutely not true. And that's the problem. If we were focusing only on the drunks and particularly the repeat offenders, the people who are repeatedly getting arrested for driving drunk, and if we actually punished them and took their license away and punished them for driving without a license, if we did all that, then that might be a good focus because those drivers really are dangerous. But instead, the DUI laws have turned into arresting people who have done nothing wrong and really aren't drunk and prosecuting them anyway. And that is common. People just don't know. People just do not understand that innocent people are arrested, innocent people are prosecuted, and innocent people are convicted. They think I'm making it up. And I work in the system, I see it.
Yeah, that statement might come as a big surprise to a lot of people. So can you explain a little bit of how that happens and what you mean by that?
Sure. It depends on what state you're in, of course. But the police, here's a great example because I'm in Florida. In Florida, first of all, you're arrested before you have any kind of breath test or chemical test. You're typically arrested and then taken to the station, and that's where you blow in the machine. So I have seen many cases where somebody's arrested, is taken to the station, blows in the machine and registers a 0.000, and is charged with DUI. His mugshot is put on the internet, and he is prosecuted. I know a case going on right now in the Florida Keys where they arrested a guy and blew a 0.00. And a lot of times you get to the prosecutor will drop it, right? But I know of one case going on the Florida Keys where they're still prosecuting the guy for it. This was a boating while intoxicated rather than a driving. And I know of a case in Palm Beach County where I live where a woman was arrested for DUI, blew a 0.00, but she was on probation for something else. So they threw her in jail on the probation violation, and then they offered her a deal. If she pled guilty to the DUI, they'd let her out of jail. And you're sitting there thinking, that's crazy. Yeah, it is crazy. That's the world we live in. And another good example now is the the massive paranoia and fear mongering about drug DUI and marijuana DUI. Now that marijuana is legal, we're now all these impaired drivers impaired on marijuana. Except the scientific evidence is that marijuana does not increase the risk of driving. Most drugs do not increase the risk of driving. Opiates do not increase the risk of driving. Alcohol, definitely, the studies show alcohol increases the risk of driving. But the vast majority of drugs that people take, prescription or illegal, do not increase the risk of driving. And that's from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, which is the same agency that trains officers how to detect drivers impaired by drugs. So go figure that one out.
No, it's amazing. And I want to go back to something I asked you about earlier, the origination of these DUI, DWI laws. When did these laws start, just so that everyone's clear on the time frame we were talking about with that?
Like I said, I'm not a great historian. I would guess sometime in the 50s or 60s, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I have a friend I've been a critic of the drug war for a long time. I have a friend who was a captain of a police department in near Buffalo, New York. And he talked about, I think it was back in the late 60s, early 70s, he was a police officer. And it was illegal at the time, but they would arrest somebody and they would usually let him go. And I think he said when he was a rookie, he arrested for somebody for drunk driving. And his sergeant says, "What the hell are you doing? Let him go. We don't arrest people for that." That's the way it was when he was a rookie. Now he's been retired for like 20 years. But when he was a rookie like 40 years ago, that was the way it worked. So that's in the late 60s, early 70s.
Wow, it's amazing how the entire approach from police officers has changed since then.
Right, but the thing is, when it became illegal and when it started becoming aggressively enforced are two different things, and you got to be aware about that. So it's probably been illegal for a long time, not necessarily on like a breath test measure, because that's the other thing. When did breath testing become reliable? And my answer would be never. But, in the world where people believe that breath testing is a reliable method of measuring or blood alcohol content, and that's a way of using that, that's only been in the last, 30, 40 years that technology's been out there, widely out there and available to be used. So, the good old days, I think it was, "You look drunk to me, Judge." Okay. And that would be enough.
Right. Okay. So, so let's go back to that a little bit. This blood alcohol concentration figure. What is it, and what is generally considered to be the points at which it is illegal to be driving with a certain alcohol concentration in your blood, and at which point it is dangerous? And of course, this varies by body type and gender and all sorts of factors. But can you give sort of a general overview of what we're looking at there?
Sure. I'm not sure I agree that it varies by body type, and gender.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
what varies, to some extent, it varies by state. By and large, most states, so blood alcohol content or blood alcohol concentration is the percentage of alcohol in your blood. So 0.08, let's say. When you hear the number 0.08, it's not 8%, it's 0.08%, or less than 1/10% of your blood is alcohol. Okay, and you can really get into the science. I know a guy, Ted Vosk, up in it's Oregon or Washington State, who's like this really picky scientific lawyer who picks apart these things in finer detail than I possibly could. But the general sense is there's a way of measuring blood, or measuring the breath and then inferring the blood alcohol content from the breath. But the general idea is if you take a certain quantity of someone's blood and 0.08% of that or more is alcohol, then they're over the limit. And then actually in New York, where I'm from, there is an arguable threshold that's somewhere around 0.05 or 0.06 that is a lesser offense called DWAI. And that term exists in other states, so it can be confusing, driving while ability impaired. So you can be below 0.08 and still guilty of something in New York. You actually can be guilty of it anywhere, because the blood alcohol content isn't the only deciding factor. It's a predominant factor, and it matters a lot, and juries pay a lot of attention to it. A lot of states have adopted, including Florida, including New York, and many states have adopted something called aggravated DUI or enhanced DUI, where if the blood alcohol content is a higher level. So in New York, I think it's 0.18. I think in Florida, it's 0.15. If your blood alcohol content is over that level, then you have enhanced or increased penalties. And so that's another thing that comes up when you talk about the numbers. So, and by the way, a common mistake, people will call me and say they got arrested for drunk driving. and I'll say, well, what was the result of the breath test? And like a guy called me the other day, he said, zero point 0.8. Well, zero point 0.8 would mean you're dead. I think the worst client I've had a blood alcohol content of 0.32, which is 4 times the legal limit. And I think when you start getting up to that high, you start risking actual death or serious brain damage. If your blood alcohol content goes up over, say, 0.35, 0.4, there's a certain point where it becomes toxic. We all know people can be knocked unconscious, pass out from drinking too much alcohol. Well, if you drink enough alcohol, you can actually die. And blood alcohol content is an indicator of the type of thing that can kill you.
All right, now when we talk about the breath test, how is that test performed, and what are some of the issues with that test?
Sure, there's multiple ways that people are tested. There's actually 2 different common breath tests used. So the first one, what often happens at the roadside before you've been taken to the station is a police officer would hand you a handheld device called a portable breath screen, a portable breath test. A common brand name is Alka-Sensor. And you blow in that, and it is not considered reliable enough to be used as evidence in court, but it is considered reliable enough to be used for probable cause for the decision of whether or not to arrest somebody. So in theory, if somebody blows in this device and blows a 0, then the police would say, gee, we don't have probable cause. Or if they blow into it and it registers a positive number or a high number, then the police can use that as part of their case for deciding, all the things they're looking at to decide whether or not to arrest the person. In practice, I've seen people blow 0s on the portable breath screen and be arrested. I've seen people blow positive numbers and not be arrested. So, but that's the portable breath screen device, and people commonly will refer to any device as a breathalyzer. That's not a breathalyzer. And the breathalyzer actually isn't commonly used. But the breathalyzer is a reference to the next test, the test that's done in the station. It is a somewhat more sophisticated machine. It has features that are supposed to check to make sure that other things aren't interfering with the result. And there's a whole bunch of brand names for it. In Florida, they use something called the Intoxilyzer. In New York, one of the most common ones is the Data Master or the Draeger. There's a lot of these devices, and they're typically in a room. It's a larger device with a computer in it. And I'm not saying it's a brilliant computer, but a computer. And you blow in it. There's several stages of the test. It checks blank air first to make sure it registers a 0. It tests a sample that is, quote, known to be a certain level to see that it's registering correctly on this known sample. In other words, they'll have a container with a fluid that is 0.08, right? And they will test the machine on that 0.08 fluid. It'll draw air off the fluid and then see if it registers the right number. And if it doesn't register the right number, well, then the machine's not working properly or the fluid isn't right and the test isn't valid. In some states, like New York, they only have you, and then the person blows. And then they might have the machine test itself again on that liquid to make sure that it's still in working order afterwards. And this is all to show that it's a reliable test. You follow me?
Yeah.
In New York, the subject, the person arrested, only blows once. In Florida and California and some other states, the person blows twice, and the result has to be within 0.02 of each other. In other words, if you blow a 0.08 and a 0.13, then it's not valid yet.
Right.
Because it's too far apart. I actually had a case where the guy was 0.018 apart, which becomes really questionable. It's not under the state law far enough apart to be a problem. But if you're a jury, you'd be thinking, gee, that's kind of far apart. Well, 3 minutes apart, he blows a very different number. I have frequently heard police or other people say that it's a highly reliable instrument. Well, if it's highly reliable, then why would it be off by so much just 2 minutes apart? The answer is because it's not highly reliable. It's a piece of junk.
Right.
But it is widely perceived. It is one of the challenges as a defense lawyer is getting a jury to see that the devices are not genuinely reliable, that the people who operate them are not. You think about somebody draws your blood, takes it to a lab. The people who are testing it are probably, college educated, right? Maybe graduate level educated, and they're qualified and trained to do this kind of testing. But in Florida, the person who has you blow on the machine has a high school diploma, probably, maybe a GED, and 3 days of training. And they're operating a machine that's determining whether you're innocent or guilty. And their boss, the person who's in charge of making sure the device is working properly, has an extra 5 days of training and still no college degree. And still, the guy, the expert, I don't know if he's still the expert in Palm Beach County. I think he retired. He does not even have an associate's degree. He has, 2 years of college, but not a degree, not a certificate. And then he did, the 3 days of training plus an extra 5 days of training. And he's the county expert for a county of 1.3 million people. So when you get into what's going on underneath this, there's a lot of potential problems.
That's an amazingly low bar, and it's just startling to hear that. But what are some of the other tests that are performed when someone's pulled over in terms of determining whether to proceed with this and then once someone's in the station?
Sure. Well, the other testing to be aware of that's parallel to or in the big ballpark of breath testing is blood testing and sometimes urine testing. But on the roadside, you've been stopped. The police are making from the moment you're stopped, the police are starting to think about, are we going to arrest this guy for DUI? And it's a very common thought that police have, especially at certain times of the day and certain times of the week, certain days of the week, but almost all the time, police are trained to look for potential drunk driving arrests. So they'll ask whether you've had any alcohol to drink, or they'll look for whether your eyes are bloodshot. They'll look for your speech and listen to see whether your speech sounds slurred. They'll smell your breath and smell the area around you to see if they smell alcohol or marijuana or whatever. So there's sort of an initial phase right when you've opened the window and you're talking to the police, if you open the window. But when you're talking to the police officer, he first approaches your car. That police officer is looking for certain things to indicate whether he should go a further step and maybe get you out of the car. And then when he gets you out of the car, so that's, looking for bloodshot eyes, looking for your speech, looking for the odor of your breath, and so on. When he gets you out of the car, and let's say you fumble with your driver's license, you have physical coordination problems, various things they look for. When they get you out of the car, there's certain very specific tests they do. They're called standardized field sobriety tests. In Florida, they don't call them tests, they call them exercises. That's a whole long conversation of itself. That's an inside lawyer thing. But they'll have you stand on one leg for 30 seconds. And in a particular position, with your head positioned a certain way, with your hands a certain way. They will have you walk a line. The line might actually not be visible. It might actually just be pavement. And they'll tell you to walk a line, and they'll mark you off for stepping off the line when there's actually no line. You fail the test if you step off the imaginary line, only you don't know where the officer imagines it's going to be. And then another common thing they do is it's called the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. And you've probably seen this idea: police officer looking in somebody's eyes and they're waving something like a pen in front of their eyes while they're looking in their eyes. And they're looking to see eye movement, how the eye moves. And there's an argument that how the eye moves is an indicator of intoxication. And that's the pseudoscience that supports what's called field sobriety testing. And it's junk science. That's a conversation I can have if you want. But I'll put it to you this way. Typical police officer has a high school diploma and was not near the top of his class, right?
Right.
And probably was below the middle of his class. I'm going to be brutal, but that's just practical reality. Probably didn't go to one of the best high schools. Probably wasn't in the top half of his class. Might have been near the bottom of his class. There's exceptions. I've got some friends who are cops who are wicked smart. Right, but the average police officer is below average in high school, and I can explain that if you want to get into it. So that person then gets literally a few hours of training and is doing eye exams. Literally a few hours of training and is doing neurological testing, right, to diagnose whether you're impaired by alcohol. And you ever talk to an ophthalmologist? You ever talk to a neurologist? Any medical doctor? And you say, do you think somebody with a high school diploma and a few hours of training can do neurological and ophthalmological testing? And, their eyes might cross at how ridiculous that is. If you ever look into how much training an ophthalmologist has and ask an ophthalmologist whether he can see somebody's drunk by looking at their eyes, they'd laugh in your face. If you look for this thing, I have a friend who's an ophthalmologist who says there's nystagmus, which the police are looking for. There's 75 different conditions that can cause nystagmus. Not to mention, is the police officer even qualified to determine whether there's nystagmus there? There's 3 different ways they look for nystagmus. One of them is they look to see whether your eyes start to bounce or move, whether they start observing nystagmus before they get you to 45 degrees. Well, how do they measure 45 degrees? 75, 80% of the cops I've questioned don't even know how they're determining 45 degrees. They don't do the tests right. There's a way they're supposed to do them. They don't do them right. They're supposed to look for this. They don't do that. They're supposed to hold the eye out at what's called maximum deviation, moving your eye as far as it'll go. Your eye is following the pen or their finger or whatever, right? And they go all the way to one side, and they're supposed to hold your eye there for 4 seconds. And they don't. They're supposed to take 2 seconds to move across, and they don't. They don't do anything right. And these guys with, somebody with a high school diploma and a few hours of training is doing ophthalmological and neurological testing and allowed to testify to that in court against you, and juries believe it. And most defense lawyers don't know how to cross-examine it either.
Wow. Now, something you mentioned in there is when someone's pulled over, if they pull the window down, and then you continued from there. So can you talk about that a little bit? Should someone pull the window down? Should someone converse with the officers? What's the proper way to handle the situation once you're pulled over?
Sure. Most defense lawyers will say don't talk to the police. That's a common thing that a lot of defense lawyers will say. But saying it is one thing. That, the reason I became arguably famous, or at least briefly famous, is not because I wrote the book Fair DUI, and then after I wrote the book, I got a lot of questions, because in the book I say, don't roll down your window, don't talk to the police. There's different scenarios, right? You haven't had any alcohol in 48 hours, and you've got 3 passengers in the car with you, and you're a white male in your 50s, and it's a Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. They're probably not looking for drunk drivers, and you might get a break on your speeding ticket if you're polite with the police officer. I'm not saying this applies in every situation, but you're a 20-year-old male, you had a glass of wine an hour ago, you're alone in your car, so you have no witnesses to your sobriety, and it's a Friday night at 2 o'clock in the morning, that cop's looking to arrest you for drunk driving, and you don't want to talk to him. So it depends on the scenario. But after I wrote my book and I got all these questions, I came up with a method for handling traffic stops and also, incidentally, checkpoint stops, which turned out to be where I got the publicity. And the method was to not roll down the window and to hold up a sign that says, it says more than this, but the main 3 things it says in large print are, I remain silent, no searches, I want my lawyer. Not I want a lawyer, but I want my lawyer. And the idea there is you're asserting your right to remain silent. The Supreme Court has said if you don't expressly invoke your right to remain silent, then you haven't invoked it. You can't just stay silent. You have to say I'm remaining silent, which to me is a catch-22. So I thought, well, if you put it on a card and show it to them, you've said it without speaking. And keep in mind, the minute you speak, the police can say your speech was impaired. It's one of the most common, there's 2 very common lies I've seen from police in DUI arrests. The one is that the person had impaired speech, that their speech was slurred in some way. And the other one is that they smell the odor of alcoholic beverage. The phrase is literally, I detected the strong odor of alcoholic beverage emanating from the vehicle, is a classic way I've heard it said many times. There's no way of verifying whether a police officer smelled alcohol, right? He can say it till he's blue in the face, and there's no way of determining whether he's lying or not. Except, of course, afterwards when the guy blows a 0.00. And, where did the alcohol smell come from? And or the odor of marijuana is another one that's a common lie. So if you don't roll down the window, it's harder for them to claim that they detected the odor of alcoholic beverage or the odor of marijuana or the odor of whatever. If you don't speak, it's hard for them to claim that you had impaired speech. And those are 2 of the key things that police will use to escalate the encounter and arrest you. So you're taking away that evidence from them that they might use against you. So that's but it's particularly not rolling down the window is controversial. I think it's straightforward and obvious that you don't have to roll down your window, and that's a great conversation we could have if you want to have it. But definitely a lot of people think that I'm wrong, and including defense lawyers think that I'm wrong, only they don't really have better answers when they're questioned about it.
Sure. So is there ever a situation, if let's say someone has not been drinking at all, where they should welcome some sort of breath test in order to prove that, or because of how inaccurate these things are and because of the sorts of people who conduct these tests, is that something that should never even enter one's mind?
Sure. So my general answer on breath testing, remember there were 2 kinds of breath tests. There's the portable breath screen on the side of the road.
Right.
There's the one at the station. So my general advice to people is that there's very little harm in blowing in the one on the side of the road because it can't be used against you in court. So if you're arrested and you get out of the car and they ask you to blow on the device, then, and by the way, refusing to blow on the device might be used against you. But if you blow in it and you register a high number, in New York, the only thing they can say is that it was positive. They can't give the number. So positive could mean 0.001, right? But what the value in that is if you blow a 0 on the side of the road, most cops don't want to arrest. I'm very, sometimes I'm very cynical about police, but I would say a fair percentage of police, maybe most, maybe 25%, whatever, some number of cops will decide not to arrest you because you blew a 0 or you blow a very low number, right? You blow a very low number. Some cops will say, I don't want to waste my time with this guy. I got real drunks I got to go out there and get. Now, there are bad cops and they're going to arrest you no matter what. But so I think it's relatively harmless to blow in the test at the side of the road. If you've been arrested and you know you're sober, then you have reason to distrust the police about the thing they want you to blow in at the station, right? Because they've just demonstrated to you that they arrested you for the wrong reasons. So there's reasons not to trust them, and there's genuine reasons not to trust that testing. Those devices are generally unreliable. And my approach would be, if I know I'm sober and I don't want to blow in the machine, is I would repeat, when I know I'm on camera, I won't agree to a breath test, but I'll agree to a blood test. Because blood tests, even though blood tests are also imperfect, blood tests are more reliable. And if you're smart enough and you know what you're doing, you say, draw 2 vials and I'll take one with me, right? So you get your own vial tested. They may not agree to that, but you're clear that you've asked for that. You know, if you're going to be on camera and you're going to be speaking, when they ask you to blow, you say, I won't agree to blow in the machine, but I'll agree to have my blood drawn. And I want 1 vial for you and 1 vial for me. And if they refuse to do your blood draw, you have a great explanation for a jury. I wasn't opposed to having my blood tested. I just didn't trust the breath device. My lawyer told me the breath test was unreliable, that blood testing was more reliable, and I offered to do a blood test and they refused. If I'm on a jury, that's persuasive to me, right? So, I mean, that's pretty complicated. And that's what the hard thing is, that this is difficult for a lot of people. You know, for me, I live, eat, and breathe this stuff. I know what I'm doing. I have a solid, keep in mind, there was a case not too long ago in Florida where one of the best known DUI lawyers was arrested for drunk driving, and he blew. And the machine registered a number over .08. And I'm thinking, why did he blow? But he blew. So, you can tell people they shouldn't blow, but here's an example of a lawyer who's very well known and very well respected as a DUI lawyer, and he blew. My advice in general is to not blow. And it depends what state you're in, too. So in New York, if you don't blow, your license is taken away and you can't get what's called a hardship or conditional license. Just refusing, and there's a procedure to challenge this refusal, but you usually lose it. So if you refuse to blow in New York, you might lose your license for a year. If you can't afford to lose your license for a year, you better blow, right? Now, then there's the other side of it. Suppose there was an accident and there's a dead body on the scene, right? The guy in the other car is dead or one of your passengers is dead. Well, losing your license for a year isn't nearly as important as going to prison for 20 years, right? So you might decide not to blow when there's a dead body on the scene. So unfortunately, it can get very complicated what you should do. And in New York, at least, you can call your lawyer, say, should I blow or not? And then the lawyer asks you a series of questions. And as a lawyer, there's a way to ask those questions to sort of protect your client from saying the wrong thing while you're talking. So I'm sorry, that's a more complicated answer than you probably wanted.
No, it's fine.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or subscribe on Stitcher. And check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.